All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another deep dive.
It's good to be back.
We are going to be jumping into some excerpts today from Strengthening Faith Through Doubt.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think this is something that's really relevant for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah,
Look,
absolutely.
Um, it's this idea that doubt doesn't have to be like the enemy of faith, right?
hmm
It can actually be something that helps us grow.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really intriguing concept, right? Because I think a lot of times when we think about doubt, we think like, oh, no, that's bad. That means I'm losing my faith or something.
Right. Or like we're failing in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
But this book actually kind of flips the script on that and says, a doubt can actually be a good thing.
Totally.
And they even use this example, the author does, of like a time when they felt so distant from God, they felt like their prayers were just like hitting the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
And it was in that struggle that they actually found like a deeper connection.
That's powerful.
So we're going to kind of unpack some of that today and see what we can learn from it.
I mean,
So one of the things that the book talks about is like all the different doubts that people have today. And I'm sure like you've encountered this too in your own life and in your work with people.
Oh, absolutely.
What
Yeah.
are some of the common doubts that you hear people wrestling with?
Well, the book lists a bunch of them, but I think some of the big ones that come up over and over again are things like, why isn't God answering my prayers?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Like, if God is so good and powerful, then why is all this bad stuff happening in the world?
Hmm.
And then there's also those kind of existential doubts, like, do I really have a purpose?
Yeah, what's the point of all of this?
Right, exactly. And then, there's also the doubt of, like, what if I don't feel God's presence?
Like, what if this is all just like, a fairy tale?
Totally.
Yeah.
And that one I think can be especially tough because it's so personal, right? Like, it's not just about intellectual questions, it's about feeling.
It's about experience.
Exactly.
And the source actually says, these are valid questions. These aren't signs of weakness.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so important to affirm that, right? Like, it's okay to have these questions.
It's human?
Yeah, it's part of being human and it's part of being in relationship with God.
Hmm.
Because if we never questioned anything, then are we really thinking critically about our faith?
Right. Are we really engaging with it on a deep level?
Exactly.
And, I think what's so cool about this book is that it doesn't shy away from those tough questions. It actually leans into them.
Yeah.
And it says, doubt can actually be a pathway to a stronger faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting even when we don't.
Yeah, I love that because I think so often we put so much pressure on ourselves to have it all figured out.
Right. Like we have to have this perfect theology and all the answers.
Totally. But faith isn't about that. It's about relationship.
Yeah. And the book makes this really cool analogy about how Jesus actually invited doubters closer. He didn't push them away.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Like think about
Yeah.
Thomas, the disciple who doubted Jesus' resurrection.
Right. He needed to see the wounds for himself.
He needed proof.
And Jesus didn't condemn him for that. He met him where he was.
Yeah. He provided the evidence that Thomas needed.
I think that's so powerful because it shows us that God can handle our doubts.
He's not afraid of them.
Exactly.
So let's get practical for a minute.
Yeah.
The source offers some really concrete advice on what we can do to strengthen our faith when doubt creeps in.
Yeah.
One of the first things it says is get honest with God. And it uses this quote that I think is so powerful. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah. That's from Mark chapter 9.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to kind of like gloss over that or misunderstand it. But
Yeah.
what do you think that quote is really saying?
Well, I think it's not so much about begging God to take away our doubts, right?
Mm.
It's more about acknowledging them openly and honestly.
Mm.
Like, imagine saying to God, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm struggling with this. I don't understand that, but I'm still here.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's about authenticity in prayer
Yeah.
because God already knows our doubts. So why pretend bringing them to light can actually deepen our relationship?
That's a really cool way to look at it.
I think so.
And the source also talks about remembering God's track record, like looking back and remembering how he's come through for us before.
Yeah, that's so important.
There's this verse in Psalm 77:11 that says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago.
Love that verse.
And, sometimes I think we get so caught up in the present moment that we forget all the ways that God has shown up in our lives.
Yeah, we forget about his faithfulness.
Right. And so the book actually suggests, like, write down those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Take some time to actually, like, reflect on and write down those times when you've experienced God's faithfulness.
That's a great idea because it kind of shifts our focus, right? from what we're doubting to what we know to be true.
Yeah, and it builds that foundation of trust. And
Exact.
then another thing the source talks about is the importance of community.
Hmm.
We weren't meant to wrestle with these things alone.
Oh, absolutely not.
Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another.
I love that image because it shows how important it is to have other people in our lives who can challenge us and encourage us in our faith.
Yeah, we need people we can be vulnerable with, share our doubts and learn from each other.
And I think that's especially important when we're going through seasons of doubt because it's so easy to isolate ourselves. But when we have a supportive community around us, they can remind us of God's truth, even when we're struggling to see it ourselves.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Speaking of truth, the source also really emphasizes the importance of grounding ourselves in the Word.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that faith comes from hearing and hearing through the Word of Christ. That's
Yeah.
Romans 10:17.
Powerful verse.
And it even suggests spending like 10 minutes a day reading the Bible, even when we don't feel like it.
Yeah, that's about discipline, right? It's about
Yeah.
creating a consistent practice.
It's like exercising a muscle.
Exactly. The more we immerse ourselves in Scripture, the stronger our faith becomes. And sometimes we might discover a verse that speaks directly to the doubts we're facing.
Right, or offers a new perspective.
Exactly.
So, one of the most powerful points that I think this book makes is that doubt doesn't disqualify us from God's love.
Oh, absolutely not.
In fact, it actually uses this image of Jesus reaching out his hand to those who are struggling,
Yeah.
saying, come to me, it's okay to not have it all figured out.
I love that image
Yeah,
because it really challenges that idea that faith has to be perfect,
right.
like this unwavering thing.
It's okay to be messy.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay to be messy. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to wrestle with things.
And in fact, that might be where the real growth happens.
Totally. I think it's in those moments of wrestling and questioning that we often find a deeper, more authentic connection with God.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up here,
Right.
what would you say is like the big takeaway from all of this? For someone who's listening, who's maybe wrestling with doubt themselves.
Well, I think the big takeaway is that doubt is normal. It's part of the faith journey, and it can actually lead us to a stronger relationship with God.
I love that.
And I think the source kind of leaves us with this really thought-provoking question, which is, what's one small step you can take today to grow in faith, even if you're struggling with doubt?
That's a great question to sit with.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for diving into this with me today. This has been a really rich conversation.
it's been a pleasure.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.